culture because we're talking about a supernatural being and all the folklore in there, all the mystery of stuff that goes around it. There's some traditions I heard as a kid and growing up, and I still hold them true. And there's a lot of native cultures believe if you talk about them, they will come. But when you're putting Bigfoot in storytelling and stuff, you're talking about creatures that some people don't believe exist, and some believe they're an interdimensional being, and they hold strong medicine and they're powerful. And with the folklore, to give us protection, we're talking about something that has things that some people don't understand. You're opening up that door for the spirituality of things. So we usually will start out our storytelling with a prayer, and I'm going to have Steve come up. Any more questions? Anybody got any stories? Any questions?
I'll do a story.
Yes, sir.
Well, I don't know about some of you, but like me and my family, the way that we got involved with, or we got interested in Bigfoot, is the Legend of Boggy Creek.
Yeah.
And when that movie came out, that kind of really spurned the imagination. And there was it was back in 1998. We were down in Texarkana. I don't know if you guys know where Texarkana is, but it's the biggest town that's north of Falk. And Falk is where this story took place. And we were in Texarkana, and my wife and I, we went to eat at Cracker Barrel. And we ate, and then we were getting ready to leave, and you know how women are, they have to go to the restroom after they eat. And so you're gonna be there 10, 15 minutes. So instead of just standing there or sitting around, I went and they used to have hostesses then at the Cracker Barrel. And so there was an elder woman, I would guess probably 65, 70, and I went up and I just started talking to her to kill time. I said, you know, how you doing? How's work today? And I think what I opened with was, it's after 5 o'clock, your day must be done. And then she was telling me she had another job to work. And so we were just talking. I go, well, I guess you're gonna get home late. And she goes, yeah. She said, yeah, I got a little drive home. And then I said, yeah, where do you live? And then she says, Falk. And I go, hey, I know about Falk. And then I was kidding because I didn't think, I kind of thought the movie was more imagination, or you know, the way the story is told. And so yeah, I was kidding with her, and I said, yeah, I know about Falk. I said, have you ever heard about this monster down in Falk? And she goes, yeah, it's real. I mean, just point blank, it's real. And I go, really? Can you tell me? She goes, well, we don't know what it was. We never saw it. She said, but during this time period, there was like 15-year, 20-year time period where it would show up at different places in the area. And she said you could tell at her house, you could tell when it was in the area because all the cows would come up near the house. All the cows would come up from out of the fields, and they would be up around the house. And then she said a couple of days later, they go back on out. And that was the extent of her personal experience. But she said in that area for that period of time, she said the monster was real. She said we never saw it, we never knew what it was. She said, but it was real. And so I just kind of want to tell that story in homage to her. You know, I've not had an encounter myself, but being Choctaw, my dad used to tell me stories about the little people. And the little people, I kind of think, probably share the same characteristics as the big people. And my dad would say, the little people, at times they could be out in the woods. If you were out in the woods with them, you couldn't see them. They'd be right there beside you. They could take a leaf and put it over their eye, and they'd become almost invisible. And they could also make themselves so small that they could come into your house and be just everywhere in your house. You would never know it. They'd be there. And then if your little kids were prone to play out in the woods, you never let them play out there around this time to dark because the little people would take them. And so you always kept your watch on your kids, and you always worried about the little people. So I figure maybe the little people share the same characteristics as the big people. It's hard to see them. I've never seen them, but I sure do. I've heard the stories.
Yeah, Koki. And actually, that is very true, and I don't think the little people get as much recognition because the little people are also known to throw rocks. So sometimes, I actually grew up hearing my mother say sometimes, never knew really what she meant until later, you know, through the years, something would go missing in the house. And she, the little people took it?
Yeah.
Tell the little people to bring it back. So, to me, and I've heard a lot of different stories, and I speak around Oklahoma at different tribal events, and someone usually tells me a story off to the side, usually it involves little people, I think, and we do still have a lot of reports. I have a friend her father is a Cheyenne Arapaho elder, and there's a lot of stuff comes through him, and she usually passes it down to me, and there's quite a bit of reports. Not too many in this area, but over in the Chickasaw area, over by the CNR, the Chickasaw National Refuge, a little bit further south towards Tishmingo. I have a recent report up near Veneta, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
But to me, I think the little people get a scam because they don't get as much recognition as the big guys. Little people, though, in my impression and stuff, they're strong medicine. I don't know if you remember the story. I was trying to tell it over there earlier. They would take the boy and lay a knife, herbs, and there was something else out. And whatever the boy would pick would be his, he picked up a knife, he was gonna be bad. If he picked up the herbs, then they would teach him through the years to be strong in medicine. I can't remember what that third one is. It's been years since I've heard the story. But, really? Yep. Well, and that's true, but I was trying to talk. I was just reminded, a lot of people on our group, on our security team, they're actually part of people that's come on our expeditions that has decided to kind of join us. And she reminded me of an incident where we actually did get growled at. Very few times. We were down below, it was dark, and we decided to split up into our groups. Well, one of the trails kind of cuts back and goes towards where a picnic table is, back towards the river. And how many was in the group when we walked off? 2 or 3 or 4, and I was right behind him, and something very close gave up. Well, I turned, and I thought it was Hank, which is that big Marmaduke-looking dog thing over there. And I turned to yell at Hank, but everybody else was saying, Hank's not here. So yeah, from the tip of my hair all the way down to my toes, those goosebumps came. I thought, okay, well, so everybody go back over by the fire for a second. Because we usually do not get growled at. So we had a discussion, and there were some other things right around the woods, so we left that trail alone, left going down to the river alone. But as long as we stayed away from that area, we had activity over here. So there was an impression that there was something going on, they didn't want us down there. But as long as we stayed on these other trails and did what we did, we had quite a bit of activity, if I remember right. We had quite a bit of activity and some vocalizations. Sometimes on our expeditions, I don't know if Tim's walking around over here, but one expedition, we've had somebody will hear their name called. We had a Texas expedition in Fannin County near the Caddo National Grasslands, LBJ National Forest there near north of Honey Grove. We had a camp, it was in December. The tents weren't really close together, but they were sparsely apart from each other. It was a small area. And one of the guys that came in, I knew that he was a really good cook. And I said, if you don't mind, since we're going to be a ways away from town, would you mind cooking gumbo, chili, or something? Because it's December, and actually we did have snow come in. His name was Ron. Well, Everybody was saying Ron in the camp. Ron, hey, where's this? Hey, Ron, where's that? Well, we all split out in the afternoon to go look around, look for tracks and go, and there was only a few people in camp. And we all got back, and everybody jumped up and ran to the barbed wire fence, and we were coming back to the barbed wire fence, come into the camp, and there's like, we gotta tell you something. Like, what? They're like, where's Ron? They're like, well, he's another group, they hadn't come back yet. 2 people were left in the camp to get things situated, and I can't remember, do something with the thermal cameras. They stayed behind, we had a fire going, and it was kind of cold. But while we were all out, we had radios, the guys were sitting there, and there was, Ron, coming from the woods. And they're like looking around going, Ron's not here. A few more times, Ron was being spoken from the woods. So they were trying to call us on the radios, but we were so far out and the timber was so thick, the radios were not penetrating the timber. Later that evening, we were sitting in camp. We were getting ready. I think he was cooking something. Some guys were in their tents, and some of us were milling around, some people over by their cars. Run! Came from the woods again. Now everybody jumped up, everybody started turning, started going, checking where everybody was at. Everybody was in camp. Everybody came from doing whatever they're doing by the cars, came over and stood. And Ron comes out of his tent, comes back over to where we're standing, and he goes, quit jacking around. And we're like, no, everybody's here. We did not know that some of us went to town a little bit earlier, and he was left alone in camp. People went off hiking or doing something. He heard his name called from the woods multiple times, and he got to the point he just ignored it. He had a cooler. He brought some venison, and he had a cooler out back of his tent, one of the old good ones. Well, that night we went to sleep. My tent was not too far from his, and I had a big tree. I had laid a tarp out and laid my tent on top of it, so I had some space because it had snowed. Probably about 2 feet from the edge of my tent to the edge of the tarp. And you heard, everybody's now asleep. This is, I can't remember, somewhere after 3 o'clock. You heard, run, from the woods. Ron must have been sleep listening because he goes, what? No noise. But it was funny is that barbed wire fence was about 30 yards away. And if you camp in the woods when it's snowing, and you can hear a squirrel burp. It's so quiet. I was gonna say something else, but you can hear that barbed wire fence. I was like, what in the world was that? Later I found out what it was, but I was like, what is that? Next thing you know, that cooler. And Ron yells out, who's with the cooler? Stop. Because it's literally when he opens the lid, it slaps the back of his tent. He did it a few more times, and he said, what? Stop. Next thing I know, I heard across that tarp. I felt whatever it was land behind my head as I stepped on that tarp as it kept on going, and the ground kind of thud. And instantly I had that, well, do I need to get up and go, or I'm going to lay here for a while? So I laid there for a while, never heard anything else, fell asleep, got up, got out, did what I had to do, come back and get back in. One of the guys had one of the old time coffee, campfire coffee pot where it percolates all by itself and everything. He couldn't find his. Long story short, some girls on the expedition went hiking, and they found it like 200 or 300 yards away, sitting up on a rock. Yeah, we had thought, and that was years ago. We thought, well, we're going to try it, trick them. I didn't know much then. Trick them in. I'm going to go get in a ghillie suit. I'm going to be up on a small ridge, and I'm going to be what they call in the military an overwatch. All the groups are going to be down here in the woods moving around. I'm going to be up in an overwatch, up in some pine thicket, so I can look down. Had the thermal. Snow had already kind of melted. There's some snow and still on top of the pine trees, and there's still snow in certain areas on the ground where the sun just hadn't came through and melted it. I got the pants part of the ghillie suit on. I bent down, reaching in the backpack to grab the top part of the ghillie suit, and a snowball landed And I looked at it for a second, and I went to raise my head, but then I looked back down. I was like, no, it came from the side because it broke apart and rolled. And I turned to look back behind me, and I could see probably 60, 80 yards in every direction. The trees were just spaced enough apart. I could see. There wasn't much undergrowth. And I'm thinking, okay. So I put the ghillie suit top on. Gary put the hat on, and there's another snowball. Broke right by my feet. That one got my attention. So I took everything off, kind of stuck it on top of the backpack, and I'm starting to walk around. There was some deadfall and a snag, and it was huge, so I knew if I walked up on it, it ain't gonna fall. I got up there and I started looking around, and there was nobody. There was nobody around. So then what does your imagination start doing? Your imagination starts running with it. I got a little spooked, and I get my stuff and I take off back towards the camp. And right when I get to the edge of the camp, I heard a noise like a branch snapping, and I turned to look back behind me and I didn't see anything, but when I turned back around, one of the guys was in the camp and he was pointing at me, and I was like, what? He goes, behind you. And I said, what? There was a piece of brush back there that was sitting there just waving like that, and then it stopped. So I went back into the camp and I sat down. Everybody kept trying to call me on the radio to say, are you in position? I'd done forgot all about that. That was when I kind of started somewhat getting into it, so I didn't really know too much. And I told that story to a Ponca elder, and that's when I learned right then and there when he told me, he said, you can't trick them. They're always watching. People put trail cameras out. People try to trick them with what they call camera traps, putting them in this spot, putting this spot, so if something's walking through, if it walks this way, it's going to get caught this way. So we try to use cameras ourselves in game cameras, and they never work. But when Pete's grandfather told me about you can't trick them, I realized right then and there, you're not going to trick them. So I've heard tons of the stories. I've heard tons of people attempting to things, and I've just come to this day right here, you are not going to trick them. So I guess you have to live and learn. Sir?
I've got a story I'd like to try and share.
Okay.
It's not even mine. Earlier today, somebody was asking about Vietnam War, and I was in the Marine Corps, and I had a staff sergeant that was hardcore. He had done 4 tours, and he was force recon. And for those of you who don't know what that means they were behind enemy lines more than they were in the rear. And so they were always out gathering intelligence and sneak in through the woods, and they were anywhere from 4 to 8, 10-man teams, things like that. At any rate, the point is that he, on 2 different occasions, and he rarely would talk about it, and you could tell it unnerved him, but he did share with us his experiences with the rock apes. And at the time, you know, I was in college and I thought I knew everything, and I thought, well, maybe there's just some kind of monkey over there that I'm not aware of, you know. And it was only later that I discovered that a rock ape is essentially a 7 to 8, 9, they don't get as big as some of the Bigfoot stories tell, but they're still larger than a man. But they were renowned for throwing rocks and boulders. And there were many times, according to him, where they were in country and they had, you know, got into the position and they're going to be there for 2 or 3 days doing overwatch type stuff on the Ho Chi Minh Trail or something like that, waiting for enemy movement, call in artillery or airstrikes, that sort of thing. And he said, so we're all dug in, we're not going to move anywhere, we're just hidden, silent. He said, and these guys would run us out of our positions, and it usually happened sometime after midnight. He said they would just start bombarding us with rocks. And he said, you know, you didn't want to return fire with, you know, with weapons, because you're letting the enemy know that here's where we are, and you can find yourself surrounded by automatic rifle bearing enemy. So, you know, they tried to avoid that, but they actually, on more than one occasion, had to basically shoot their way out of these rock ape ambushes. And on one occasion in particular, he called it the rock pile, and it apparently was a very rocky mountain that they were doing a perimeter around so they could watch several different directions. And he said in this time they got assaulted several by rocks during the early portion of the night, and then they thought they were, you know, that scary portion was over. And all of a sudden one of his, I started to say co-workers, but one of the other Marines, just out of the blue, right in the middle of their perimeter, he gets chunked off of the side of this mountain. He survived, but had to be airlifted, and they actually had to engage him with automatic weapons fire and then exfiltrate because the attack was so vicious. And only one guy got injured, but several, well, I say injured, only one guy had to be airbagged, but and he was actually physically picked up and thrown. And the rest of them had rock injuries, rock-induced injuries. And they just, I mean, he said it was worse than any Vietnamese contact that they ever had.